Hello everybody and welcome to Round Glass Review, and today we're going to talk about the Spiratone 18mm f3.5 YS. So we're going to have sample photos, talk about how to actually use this, and go over as much of the lens's performance as we can. So this lens is branded Spiratone, and there's a lot already written on the internet about the history of the Spiratone brand, so I'm not going to go into it here. This lens specifically was made by Sigma. It was made sometime in the 1960s. 18mm lenses writ large are typically used for landscapes and cityscapes, night skies, star trails, things like that. But I'm going to add for this lens model specifically close-ups and travel photography as good uses for it in the right conditions. So now for those of you who just want to hear what I have to say in general and get on with your lives, this lens heralds from a time when Sigma lenses were not close to as good as they are today. I think the best thing I can say about this lens is that it's serviceable if you don't expect amazing results. This is a mood and character lens, really, not a technical lens, and if you use it as such, you will be happier with it. And in this video, I think I'm going to try and do my best to help you see how to use it that way. So a quick note on this lens, and to clear up some of the confusion that exists around it because there is a lot of different information about this lens online, Spiratone released the 18mm lens in 3 different versions. This is the Sigma-made f3.5. There was also an 18mm f3.5 that was likely made by Tamron, that's not known for sure, at least nowhere I could find, as well as another Sigma-made 18mm f3.2. The version reviewed in this video, which is the Sigma-made 18mm 3.5, based on limited available comparison photos online, does appear to be the worst of the 3. So to sum up all of the things that are available out there through various sources, the focal length and angle of view on this lens are 18mm and around 100 to 100.5 degrees diagonally on a full-frame sensor. For those of you who shoot APS-C, that means that in full-frame terms, you're dealing with something that will work about like a 27mm lens with approximately a 76-degree angle of view. The aperture range for this model is 3.5 to 22. Filter size is 72mm. Closest focus, again for this model, because I do think that it differs by the model, is 0.17 meters. Now, for those of us in the US, that is approximately the width of a good cheeseburger. It's manual focus only. This model of the lens was released, like all of the YS lenses that Sigma produced, in T-mount. Sigma YS mount is T-mount with the ability to have an automatically step-down aperture with the proper adapter attached to it. So any lens system with an available T-mount adapter can use this lens, and that's not always true of all YS lenses. This lens has an automatic manual aperture switch, so you don't have to have an automatic YS adapter in order for this lens to work, and that's pretty nice in terms of YS lenses. So basically, all 35mm film SLR systems and all existing mirrorless systems can use this lens. It is highly adaptable. It weighs in at 272.3 grams without an adapter. There are some different weights provided online. I went ahead and just grabbed an accurate scale, and that's what it came in at. My best tip for you is that this lens is shockingly hard to use, and even harder to use if you want consistency from it. The light loss varies substantially across the aperture range. We can add to that this lens's difficulty with accurate focus on SLRs and the focus scales, which I found to be very inaccurate on mine. And basically the only way to use this lens and obtain anything like consistency is with a mirrorless camera or a digital SLR that has focus peaking. And even then, quite honestly, this lens is pretty soft. If you are not using the manual focus zoom in function on your camera, you're still going to have a hard time focusing it because it's so soft that focus peaking is not very reliable. The next tip for this lens is that it really is its best from a technical perspective, stop down to f5.6 to f8. That shouldn't be a surprise to learn, but how much better it is versus wide open or at f16 and smaller is surprising. Even by f11, this lens starts to exhibit some pretty good diffraction softness. Wide open, this lens's most significant flaw is not that it vignettes, but that it has, spots of sharpness. Not rings, not areas, just spots. That can either make or ruin your image, and it's very hard to work with. This may be a surprise for you to learn, but I liked the wide open results that worked best from this lens. So when everything aligned wide open, this lens really performed in a captivating manner. I don't want to call it good, captivating. Wide open, this lens is very warm. And if you get your subject in one of those focused spots, then the image can really fall into place around it. Stop down, I felt that this lens was too cool tone for my typical taste in images. This lens also, as my next tip, is best suited for dramatic angles and subjects, for getting close to your foreground and emphasizing your background. That's true of ultra-wide lenses writ large, however, but there's something about how this lens handles distance that can, if you luck out, yield very nice results. So that makes architecture, landscapes to an extent, and close-up shots where you want a lot of background in that background, the best uses for this lens, with the big asterisk on architecture being the distortion that this lens provides. For subjects to avoid, well, people are a big one. I could see using this lens for astrophotography, but it would not be my first choice. Pretty far from it, in fact, and that's due to the softness and the significant amount of vignetting that this lens exhibits. Breathing, from close to far, is noticeable. In distances more likely to be used in practical application, breathing could be worked with. As a side note, with the 4 still images, note the significantly different color temperature between the f3.5 and f8 samples, with the latter being far cooler. Aperture is stepped at full stops. The detents, at least on my lens, and this could be due to age and use, are pretty sloppy. The front element is non-rotating, making it a good choice for gradient and CPL filter use. It does move in and out, though from infinity to closest focus, the horizontal throw is only 4 millimeters. The rotational focus throw is quite significant at 260 degrees, allowing for very precise focus with a mirrorless camera or DSLR that allows you to zoom in. The focus ring is a suitable size and horizontally stationary as it rotates. Focus damping is going to vary significantly by lens due to age and use, but on my copy at least, it's smooth, if not super well dampened. Focus ring play is non-existent on my copy, and I would expect this to be fairly consistent as these are metal lenses and really they're fairly well built. Right off the bat, let's tackle some of the strong cons with this lens. In some settings, it will hotspot in the center of your image, which is a manifestation of internal light reflection flare, and that light just happens to come to rest in the center of the frame. Now usually that occurs with out-of-frame light, and the aperture being stopped down to one of the smallest settings. Generally f22 is the worst, f16 it's visible. Ghosting is quite significant with this lens also, and it dominates an image when it's present. Now, in these flare samples that you're seeing, there is both ghosting, which is the hexagon shapes, or the circular shapes of different colors, and flare. Flare being the light areas of the frame that lack contrast. In general, though not always, with this lens, those two flaws travel in tandem. For distortion and light loss, we'll start with distortion, as it's significant, as is expected from vintage retrofocus ultra-wide lenses. Light loss is remarkable in its severity. These samples show how much light is lost at infinity focus on a plain white projection screen. It's actually my computer monitor, so it's evenly illuminated. The strangest thing to me is that at f22, noting that this lens is worse at f22 regarding light loss than most lenses are wide open, There's also a strange blotch of inconsistent illumination in the center of the field. In practice, that's only noticeable on flat white surfaces. I never saw it before doing the test with my computer monitor. Coma is present, but not nearly as severe as on many lenses of this vintage, and it's functionally gone by f5.6 when you focus in the distance. Focusing this lens at its closest point will always reveal blurring that, insofar as I can tell, comes from spherical aberration and coma, which are not well corrected at the near focus points. That said, if you embrace that look, it can be useful because this lens has a fantastic closest focus point of just a few inches. Sharpness is really lacking except at f5.6 and f8, where it's okay by the standards of the time for consumer budget lenses. Though generally soft with random sharp areas wide open, I honestly like it the most from there to f5.6. I find it, like I said, pretty sterile by f8. Build quality is on par with vintage consumer-grade lenses. There's no obvious slop, for instance, and all the metal parts fit together fairly well. But something in the amount of resistance in the focus and the aperture ring, or maybe the lack of resistance, feels not so much broken in, as it feels like this lens was manufactured to slightly more forgiving tolerances than higher tier lenses of the same vintage. But it should be noted, this lens has held up over the years, and that's worth recognizing as a sign that it has the ability to continue holding up. I would expect this lens to still be usable in some decades or longer from now, and I definitely can't say that in good faith of plastic lenses that are new today or older. Contrast is flat to muddy out of the camera. Now, the images in this video look contrasty because of the post-processing to see what I could pull out of this lens. As a general rule, I prefer a flat lens because, and you know what I'm going to say next, you can always add contrast, you cannot remove it. This lens gives you a lot of editing flexibility in post with a good raw workflow. So for me, this lens' general flat contrast profile is a plus. Now these examples here show two different ways this lens performs regarding contrast and with the angle of light reaching it. The ones marked unedited are straight from camera raw. The unmarked ones are edited to my liking in RAW, and as you can see, the contrast is generally flat, but also dependent on the way that the light outside of the frame, specifically bright light, is entering the lens. Aperture shape is 6 blades that form a hexagon at every stop wide open, and this does affect source light ghosting, hotspot shape, and out of focus areas. And those out-of-focus area characteristics, when they exist, they are generic but not in a pleasant way when focused at a distance, and they can be distracting, again, not in a pleasant way, when the lens is focused closely. In terms of balance with cameras, it's fine with film cameras and DSLRs. It's only fair with a heavy mirrorless, and it's generally unpalatable with a light mirrorless. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. The lens's mushroom shape, and I assume because this is a retrofocus design, I couldn't find a diagram for it online, but it has to be. That means that there's a front-heavy element placed at the front of the lens, and that makes this lens a bit of a pain to use on light cameras because of all of the mass being so far forward. When there's mass behind the lens, like with a heavy camera, it's better balanced. Another issue for mirrorless users, especially small mirrorless cameras, is that this is T-mount, and the mounting flange on this is so far forward that you need a very long adapter, and that just even further extends this lens's mass away from the camera and just makes it even more front heavy. Sigma today makes far different lenses than they did when this lens was made. If you bought or plan to buy this lens expecting it to be the same quality that today's Sigma lenses are, well, you'll be disappointed. I recall when Sigma lenses started to be really good, and this is in the mid-90s. My dad bought me the 50mm f2.8 1:1 macro Sigma made, and it was staggering. But I recall the camera store owner, when I asked him if it was any good, looking at a colleague and then back at us and saying, well, it's made in Japan. As an adult now, I recognize that as the sentiment of someone with a low opinion of Sigma lenses. But that 50mm lens was great. Sigma lenses today are great. Sigma lenses of the 60s, those were soft, unpredictable, inconsistent, but with generally good build quality. Today, this can be a serviceable lens if you adjust your expectations accordingly. That's my way of trying to politely say, set your expectations low, but that's also not totally fair, because if you embrace the warmth and the softness of the wide apertures, this lens can deliver captivating images. Like any photographic tool, with the right setting and intent, this lens can still be the proper and perfect implement to translate your creative vision into still or moving images. And honestly, being a lens that does impart a softness-imbued character into your scenes, it could fit a niche need. So enjoy this lens for what it is, for the wide-open softness and warmth, the incredibly fantastic close focus point, the precise and pleasing feel of the focus ring, and its very good amount of throw. This is a lens that, as a shooter's lens, is fun and highly usable. You just aren't going to get pixel level detail, and you should neither expect nor want to.